that there. Okay. All right. So let's get rocking and rolling. There are some marketers who have what I call big marketing brains, people who are pace setters, innovators. And you are in luck today because we have one of those speaking to us, James Hankins, who him and JP Caslin, who is the king of strategy, writes a fabulous newsletter that I would recommend you subscribe to when you're out there practicing marketing around e-commerce, around COVID, and they predicted that COVID was life would go back to normal, but companies like Nike didn't understand it. He developed and created the share of search, that Hexagon, a far better way to understand how sales and marketing operate in as opposed to the funnel, which I'm not a big fan of. So I'm going to shut my fat face and ask James to take on over. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this, sir.
Absolutely, and thank you. It's an absolute privilege to be here, and I really appreciate it. Appreciate the attendance as well. So it's as Thomas said, kind of my name's James Hankins, and there's a lovely cutout of me. It looks quite similar. I think my quiff's on the other side, the mirror image, and I am. I suppose my proposition in markets is I've done B2B, I've done B2C, I've done B2B2C. I've worked at marketing services agencies, kind of creative media, leading comms planning and comms strategy for some of the biggest brands in the world. I've set up my own consultancy, marketing strategy consultancy, and I was a kind of expert advisor to a McKinsey partner for a period, amongst some other big names. And then I started at Sage, which is a large SaaS business based out of the UK, but a huge organization in the States as well, and ran their global marketing strategy and planning function in addition to kind of their corporate market and competitor intelligence as well. I eventually ended up in the office of the CEO for a period there, and then exited kind of about 6 months ago. Took some time out, and now I'm back on the consultancy game again. And Thomas approached me and said, "Would I come and talk to you about a couple of things?" And I've been quite lucky with a few things. So share of search is one of them. We're going to talk about that in a moment. The Hankins Hexagon, yes, it is a play on words. It is supposed to be funny. I do have an ego, but I can also laugh at myself. And I was trying to create a bit of noise about my business. Digital availability. I'm sure you'll have heard of Byron Sharp's work with mental and physical availability. I wrote a couple of papers on why digital availability and distribution through digital channels is a distinct specialism. The reason being is that if you say to a non-specialist about physical availability, they will immediately think of stock shops and bricks and mortar. Digital availability, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Google, etc., digital shelf is a very different place. And so at this moment in time, you still need to create distinction between the two. And then with JP Caslin, the gravity of e-commerce and various others. And there are more to come. There is a lot of talk around the crisis of effectiveness in this market. I'm not convinced. I think there are other things at play. There's a lot of talk within the UK, in Europe at least, around trying to get accountancy standards changed to place marketing on the balance sheet. That's absolutely not the right thing to do. There's the kind of the importance of the SMB market, small businesses out there. I mean, it underpins Google and Meta's business models. Why wouldn't it underpin a lot of the big agency groups and providers out there? I am a big proponent of understanding markets and why that is a key part of marketing. And share of search plays into that, the understanding of market dynamics. And I recently kind of wrote a paper with the B2B Institute at LinkedIn on the underappreciated nature of the ubiquitous B2B event, which was launched yesterday actually. So it's worth having a look at that report. But today we're going to talk about these two things: share of search and the Hankins Hexagon. I like to think they're similar concepts in that they are simple and obvious. But what links them is that they are at a market level. So when you share of search, you are looking at market dynamics. When you are reviewing the hexagon, the Hankins hexagon, it is a metaphor for the market and where consumers are within market at any given time. Because, as I referred to a moment ago, in my opinion, knowing the market is everything in marketing. The word is in there. And I quite often get asked, but customer insight, consumer insight. Well, yeah. But markets are just lots of consumers and customers. They are consumers and customers at the highest level. They are the distribution of behavior. And understanding that distribution of behavior is how you quite often understand performance and opportunity within market. I still think there's a value in understanding individual customer needs. Quite often, what you're talking about there is edge cases, specific needs at either end of that bell curve. But yes, ultimately, market is part of marketing, and that's where share of search came in. So we're share of search, the world's greatest and largest database on intent and of intent. Google Trends gives you access, and Google, after years of ignoring share of search, genuinely years of ignoring share of search, which you would have thought would have been quite valuable to them, they have made the API available, so you can get hold of the data direct from Google now, whereas previously you had to do it via Google Trends. You can still do it via Google Trends, but yeah, it is now available. And why is share of search interesting? Because when you calculate it right, share of search equals share of market share. And market share data, if you take it from a Kantar or one of the third-party data providers, is incredibly expensive. It's really expensive, and not everyone can afford it. What share of search allows you to do is identify and understand your market share, no matter what size of business, who you are, or where you are. And share of search doesn't just work with Google Trends. If you were to go to Russia and use the Russian search engine of choice, I can't remember its name, but it works there. If you look on LinkedIn and use share of mentions, share of search on LinkedIn, it works there as well. Because like all good insights, it seems clangingly obvious when you think about it. People broadly search in proportion to the way they shop and buy, and branded search actions are a good proxy for spending with a brand. Yes, there are brands occasionally where you search and you don't buy. There are brands with disproportionate searches versus purchase. A good one in the snack market for potato snacks is Pringles. It has disproportionate interest versus its actual sales. But then they've spent a lot of money at I think it's Lay's, PepsiCo, promoting that, and that's why it's got disproportionate search share versus its actual market share. But this is what it comes down to: share of search, and you therefore have access to a data source that tells you whether you are winning or losing in market at any one point. That seems quite important, because it's all very well, hitting your numbers, 12% market growth, great. Yeah, but are you beating the competitors? Because that's what commerce is about, winning somehow. Share of search holds true across multiple different categories. There are a lot more kind of bits of evidence available now than there were a couple of years ago when myself and the IPA published a bit of research that showed that 20 different categories, I think it was, landed or worked using share of search. There are multiple businesses out there. My Telescope is one of them. Storybook AI is another that kind of have productized share of search and search insights so that businesses can access them. But as I said, the API is available and Google Trends is also freely available. So I imagine if you used your LLM of choice, you'd be able to, or you certainly can, type in how to begin utilizing it, and it will give you a list of instructions. Now, what's quite interesting about the number R squared here, basically share of search kind of explains around about, on average, 69% of kind of the data. Now, when you look at what we think share of search means, it's representative of the demand side of the market, customer demand. You can generate demand, Say's law, supply creates its own demand. Being on shelf creates its own demand. But that shows you the difference between the two, and I've got the number slightly wrong there. It should say 69%. But essentially, share of search represents on average 69% of the market. The other side is distribution, presence on shelf. And to those of you who are aware of Binet and Field, who are marketing science legends, I'm sure Thomas has introduced you to them. If not, you can have a look online. They talk about 60-40 as being the balance between demand side, brand, and essentially supply side, which is kind of direct response. So future business, today business. But yeah, it begins to line up that all of this works. There's loads of research around market share and why it's important. You don't need to worry about that, other than there's a lot of evidence that shows that market share and profitability go together, which is great. But the other thing to be aware of with market share and what it helps you do is it tells you largely what's going to happen tomorrow. Because if you have market share of 20% today, it's likely that you'll have 20% tomorrow. Market share doesn't change that much. Penetration doesn't change that much either, and there is a difference between those two concepts. I think Kantar recently released some evidence that demonstrated on their world panel that 1% market share gain in any one year was the highest performers. Doesn't sound like 1% market share, but when you're working within a market that's worth billions, 1% is a lot of cash. So it is meaningful to understand how you're performing in market share terms, but it also gives you a bit of a break on kind of the ambitions that you often see within a commercial environment. You'll see kind of leaders come up with, oh, we're going to grow X%. There may well not be enough opportunity in market, or there may not be the ability for your company to actually grow that much, because your market share is the gravity that holds you in the short term, short and medium term. As I said, business is about more than improvement. Performance is about success relative to others, market share. Lovely little Schitt's Creek GIF there. So let's start with share of search. Google Trends, first place to start. If you want to know a step-by-step way of doing it, the EQ Planner is my website. Thomas will ping it around after, but it's got 2 papers on there, step by step, exactly how to do it, how to pull the data and that sort of stuff. So what I'm going to focus on is some examples and some insights that you can derive from it. Share of search is an output. It's like market share. You know, it's the result of loads and loads of things that you do as a business. Loads of things can affect it. It's a macro kind of measure. You can game share of search, but it requires significant levels of fraud to game search listings. And it does not preclude the possibility of an individual brand growing in absolute terms. It's cash, profit, or revenue. It's about the relative performance. Are you winning or losing versus the competition? I'm a big fan of the insight capabilities. It's not perfect at all because no metric is, but it's directional. It gives you enough information. This is Byron Sharp. I'm not going to pretend that it's a law either, even if it holds true every time I've looked at share of search. And the Ehrenberg Bass Institute are going to be publishing something in the next few months. Big research university down in Australia, which I believe is going to disprove the predictive element of share of search. Again, I'm fine with that because it's not really about prediction, it's about what's happening now. If we could tell the future, I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. I'd be sitting on the beach in the Caribbean. Anyway, here are the 11 techniques, and there are more, but these are the typical ones that I use to apply share of search, and I'll show you examples of each. So there's share of search as a metric, I track it over time, and then there's share of search as a diagnosis tool, which allows you to look at market dynamics. S curves and Rogers innovation curves, I'm sure you'll have heard of. The theoretical application of them, where you can create them using share of search data, which is pretty incredible. The zigzag is the classic Binet and Field kind of short-term, long-term impact. You can create that using share of search data for the first time ever. And there are various other techniques that you can use. Now, some of these require input data, i.e. spend data on advertising or marketing or sales and promotion. Those are the ones that are in white, and then the green ones are pure share of search on its own. So yeah, I won't dwell too much on the equation because you can find that online. So getting the right term for share of search is quite important. We reference brand terms, but here's an example I did for cereals, fruit and fibre and fruit and fibre. I believe the brand term, if you look at the pack, is fruit and fibre. That is not what people search. They actually spell out the and. So as you can see, the blue line would give you the wrong sort of calculation. As I said, it's not a perfect measure. It's not a perfect metric. Think about how people would search for your brand. Google do a lot of the hard work because they also pop in, for example, this is the company I used to work for, Sage Group. I would use that Sage Group as rather than Sage the plant or common sage. Again, this is quite important because it does have an impact. There's 4 brands here, a couple of which you definitely recognize, Intuit and QuickBooks. They're quite large over your side of the pond. Xero and Sage Group, slightly less. But as you can see, no one really searches for Intuit. Everyone searches for the product. And this gives you a view on performance within the UK across the 3 biggest accountancy software products in market: Sage, QuickBooks, and Xero. As you can see there, Xero, the plucky little Antipodean brand, is the dominant player, and it's actually increased its market share significantly. So you get this data. This on its own is not share of search. This is the raw data, and you pull it out using your drop down there, and then you treat it in several different ways. And again, I'll point you to the website, the EQ Planner, for that guidance. But essentially, you have these lovely charts now. So you have share of search over time, and it goes back, 20 years now. 20 years of longitudinal data. You won't get that anywhere else. Of consumer intent for every brand in the world, even your local mom and pop store, or the local in town accounting service or lawyer. you can do share of search on those relative to the local competitors, and you'll get something out that you'll be able to compare. So what you can share here is Sage Group used to dominate the market. Sage missed the cloud revolution. Xero didn't, and QuickBooks didn't take a benefit, even though they've been kind of kicking around for a long time. Interestingly enough, in the US, there was a company called Peachtree that used to compete with QuickBooks. Back in the day, Sage bought it and drove it into the ground. At the time Sage bought it, it was the same size as QuickBooks. But you can begin to see patterns within this data, because this tells you an awful lot about market dynamics. What have they done what did Xero do in order to essentially overtake over the period of 15, 20 years? What you also get is an S-curve using the data in a slightly different way. And what you have is the beginning of an S-curve up until around kind of 2014. There's a little S there. And then you've got the cloud revolution, which reduced the barrier to entry and increased the opportunity and market size of the accountancy software market. So you can begin to see, well, Xero took advantage of that, because as they grew, April 24 is when they started to accelerate away. You can begin to paint a picture of market dynamics. Similar to the premium makeup category, whatever happened to MAC Cosmetics? Well, what actually happened was they took their eye off the ball, and they got pulled down into the hyper competitive, that's Longcom in the middle, market, where they basically beginning to lose their distinctiveness and allow other players to come in. So there's a lot of information that you can pull from these rather simple plots. Here's the Sage one again, and here's a nice visual of the two different S curves, which basically plots your Rogers innovation curve over time. So you have first S curve is accounting software over time, and then second S curve is as it kicks in with the cloud revolution. We will probably have another acceleration for the AI revolution, which will also drive legislative events and increase the usage of accounting software within small businesses. In the US, I think Intuit are the largest player with QuickBooks, and they have about 6.5 million, 7 million customers. There are 30 million businesses in the US, so there's a hell of a lot out there of market opportunity, if only you can make it easy for them to come on board. Here's a market comparison website. So I launched in the UK a brand called Go Compare. There's a couple of others, but there was a period where it was hyper competitive and they were all spending, significant sums on marketing. Then it bottomed out, and this is what you see over a long period, and why market share kind of governs future performance is because once leadership is hit and made, it is very hard to overtake. No matter what you do. And again, because you've got 20 years worth of data, you can begin to plot that out and show those movements and show the dynamism in the market and also what's happening next. Because in that comparison website market, what you realize very quickly is that you've hit a platform. So you've hit the S curve at the top, flattening out, because 72% of people use comparison websites in any 1 year. So it becomes a challenge around customer value, rather than offering kind of existing customers a bit more value, because there's only so many that are going to switch and move around in market. You can compare different countries and their growth trajectories, and you can begin to make strategic decisions based on where country A is versus where country B is and where to put your money. This is all from the same data source. And again, all the detail around how you can use this data to plot it out is there. Where are different brands in their life cycle? You can see brand 1 here is rocketing up the S curve. Brand 5 has had a bit of a resurgence, and these are all kind of base pointed against the number of weeks they've been in market. So brand 1 only took 61 weeks to get brand leadership, whereas brand 5 took 109 and it's still not number 2. So you can begin to plot out and use the data in different ways because you understand that this represents market dynamics and market share. Come back to here. Now, Byron Sharp always says, oh, but you can't trust share of search. And to a degree, I agree with him in that you've got to do your own validation. You've got to go out there and prove and demonstrate to your leaders in these commercial organizations that share of search is worth doing. You can believe me, obviously, or you can go out and validate it yourself. That means that you've got to go out there and look for representative data and market share data, or even kind of revenue data. All companies have to report their revenue to the Inland Revenue, tax services, find that data, and then use that to validate against your market share data. Again, because it's very interesting. And what do you find out? These are the sorts of places where you look. Clients will have data, investor relations, Companies House, the HMRC, kind of tax organizations. They all have an opportunity to find market or revenue data that you can then turn into market share data that you can then compare to share of search data, because share of search data is 20 years plus years of longitudinal information. So it's incredibly valuable. I'll skip through some of these because they are just examples of that validation. Comparison websites, yeah, it validates at an individual brand level as well when you're looking the difference between share of search and share of revenue. Or this sector here, you got an amazing kind of correlation. I think this is universities in the US. At a brand level, slightly different patterns. Again, the difference between the share of undergraduates, so it is, and the share of search. You can see the pattern fits, but there is variation between the different universities. So it's useful to understand that in order for you to understand what's going on. T Market in the UK, I always like this one because it matches, and it also tells you that own label was doing really, really well in this market, the value of own label and private label, and that commodity prices jumped into 2017, which pushed up the prices of tea, and it meant that own label was actually more expensive than some of the big brands in the UK, and you wouldn't have thought that would be the case. People bought more private label, even though it wasn't the cheapest, because it was private label. There's a brand effect going on there. And the only reason I knew this was because I did some dig deeping with this information. If you get some spend data, input data, the world's your oyster, because as Thomas will know, share of voice versus share of market is a consistent relationship. If you invest more than your share of market or invest more than your share of search, you are more likely to grow. Brands that underinvest tend to decline. You can begin to do this analysis using share of search because you have that long-term longitudinal data. You can map out whether a brand has greater than you'd expect share of voice versus its extra share of voice. You can begin to plot out whether a brand is over-investing or under-investing, that's above and below the line, and whether it's growing or shrinking. You can tell whether shifting all their marketing spend into digital has really helped this brand, because its share of search has begun plummeting since it put all its investment into digital channels. Or have they started using a new creative because they've increased their spend, but their performance on the right-hand side has begun to plateau? So, you know, is it creative or is it media that they're using to grow? As I said, this amazing chart here that Binet and Field have done, you can actually do it for yourself now, because you can use long-term share of search, branded kind of 12-month data versus short-term movements in share of search. So I did it for the term share of search. And as you can see, the total share in white has been increasing, but you can see the moments which are the short-term sales of share of search, when they bump up, and you can see those movements. So you can begin to do it with commercial data as well. Look, you can see with this FMCG brand, the big uptake a single month of short-term sales does to the overall market share or the share of search in white. Whereas it's slightly different with B2B on the right-hand side. And then there's a very simple version as well, which is versus the category. So the category is the average or the aggregate of all the different brands that you're looking at. If your brand is sat within that group of brands and it's not behaving how the average is, you've got a problem. In this instance, you're looking at whether a brand is bucking the trend for kind of a generic term for that category or not. You don't want to be bucking the general trend, because quite often that means you're losing. To buck the average is very, very hard. So, and I'm conscious of time, and I've still got to do a quick whiz through the Hankins Hexagon, but that gives you a sense of, and hopefully a picture of all the different techniques that having a 20-year record of market share across any brand out there can unlock, which is a very, very powerful place to be. When you're going in for interviews, you can do a quick view on the brand you're interviewing for versus its competitors, and you'll be able to do a bit of diagnosis and go, well, actually, they've been in material decline for the last, and ask the right questions. Why is that? What has happened? And explain it to the person who's interviewing, that you've done your due diligence and you truly understand the market that you're hoping to work in.
Killer insight, students. Pay attention to that one.
The Hankins Hexagon is a metaphor, and like funnels, there are lots of them, metaphors that is. Now, I will point to the funnel as being a cockroach theory. There's a guy called Tom Roach in the UK. He's a very nice man, very smart, friend of mine. Wrote a paper a couple of years ago on the funnel being a cockroach theory, and he referred to the history of the funnel. Now, it's worth going through that very, very briefly. You start with IDA. It's a sales model that has been converted to help marketing or not, or hinder awareness, interest, desire, and action. It's over 100 years old. There have been multiple evolutions. It's not a visualization or representation of real life. It is a metaphor, and sometimes metaphors are useful and sometimes they're not. Everyone has tried to come up with new ways of articulating the funnel. There's a map of influence with Millward Brown, although, where are the inputs when Millward Brown start pinging it out there? Google came out with the 0 moment of truth, which was a new way to sell their product, which is search. They then came through 3 different stages on the path to purchase, thinking about it, researching, and then purchasing. Well, what about the moments when you're not in market and not thinking about it? Because that's 98% of the time. Microsoft talked about passive and active. Again, it doesn't bear any sort of realism, and that's fine. But if only 4% on average is spent in market, you've got to take into consideration out of market. A couple of the consultancies came up with these models, PwC, with loads of feedback loops. The most famous is probably the McKinsey loop, and it brings you back in and says that once you're in, you're in. There's a nice trigger in there, but I get nervous because of the loyalty loop, which I'm sure Thomas has talked about. What loyalty is in marketing is not what you think it is. Google published this about 4 years ago. It's a 90-page report. It's worth reading because they've got loads of behavioral insight in there as well. My personal view is it's a cop-out. Basically says it's messy. No shit, Sherlock. Thank you for that. And Tom Roach talked about the Hankins hexagon, which I'll show you in a moment, but it's kind of non-linear pinball effect. He said it was a brilliant bit of theory, which is very kind of him. But essentially, what it does is looks like this. This is another version of the path to purchase slash the funnel, and it essentially says you can pretty much start anywhere, and you bounce around inside. This is why the pinball metaphor is useful. Passive assimilation is most of the time you're not in market, and then something will happen, a trigger event. You may go straight to purchase. You may do a long list. You may do a short list. You may do a long list, then a short list, then a long list again, because you'll have learned something and gone back out again. It essentially creates a map of distribution, which you can map out like this on this decision tree. And then you know what will happen. It'll look like a normal distribution because there will be common pathways. And if you're a marketeer and you understand the normal distribution of the pathways to purchase, you can put your investment to make sure that those pathways are most important. What you can also do is compare your pathways against competitors and go, where is there the potential to build out competitive advantage? Therefore, we will invest in this area as well, because I know that my competitor isn't doing that, but I also know that consumers do follow that pathway. So it becomes, again, very diagnostic if you can get it right. However, whilst Markov chains are the maths behind it, and one company that I know of almost got there, which was one of the big delivery companies, Just Eat, out of Holland. No one else has been able to develop it yet. Theoretically, it's sound. As a metaphor, I think it's very, very useful for marketeers and students to understand that the funnel bears no reality to actually what happens, and that the hexagon is probably closer to reality, even if it is itself and also metaphor. But it's to go, there are different pathways. Marketeers' job is to identify the most impactful ones and develop customer experiences to serve that pathway in a branded way, essentially. Now, I'm conscious I've absolutely blazed through those two concepts in 51 minutes. They are both, I believe, incredibly useful in framing your thinking and developing insights. And that is what all good insight techniques should be, and metaphors should be. They should kind of allow you to sharpen your thinking. I understand from Thomas that they are new to you all. I would urge, if you are interested, to go and look at the EQ Planner. There are also, if you type in share a search, there are a load of videos. I did a load of podcasts where I explain it in slightly more depth as well, give examples, and there is a detailed way of doing it on the EQ Planner. If you are interested in following me and seeing my new thinking, which will be coming out in the next couple of months, probably under the Marketing Week banner, as well as the LinkedIn crew. Again, that's my LinkedIn and where you find me. I will stop there. If there are any questions, then please throw them out, and I will end the slideshow so that I can see some of your faces.
Are there any questions? If you don't want to say them out loud, you can put them in the chat and I'll be happy to read them out. Who's got some questions? I noticed hearing this the first time, it's pretty powerful and maybe a little overwhelming, to say the least, but we will get into doing this share of search for our AI client project. And so next week's D2L, I'll share plenty of resources, because that is really slick, that you could walk into an interview and blow away these people you're speaking to based on this model, this information that they don't probably know, and would love to hear about it, love to see it. So anybody have any questions? The chat box is open. You could take yourself off mute and just say, anybody? I don't want to hold this up. I think you blew them away there, James, and we're just overwhelmed right now. Oh, hold on. Oh,
That's me
okay, here you go.
popping it in. I can potentially preempt. I know we discussed it briefly, Thomas, before. Searches happen on other platforms. They absolutely do. The one that's always referenced is the increased number of searches for brands on Amazon, moving away from the Google search window, etc., etc. The thing is, Google is so large that even if a small percentage of people begin to use Amazon, or even a larger percentage, there's still more than enough people using the Google platform for it to be statistically valid and to correlate. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect and represent 100% of all the brand searches out there. It's good enough if you're able to show that it validates. And that you'll find in commercial life, corporate life, good enough is good enough. Don't let perfection get in the way. You are going to be telling stories. You are going to be providing, when you're developing marketing strategies, your opinion supported by data of the direction of travel of the market. And therefore, if we do this, we are more likely to win. That's ultimately what all marketing strategy, all strategy is. It's a belief in the direction of the future and a belief in the decisions that you are making. But because it is all in the future, it can't be proven up until the point that it happens. But yes, so it does work, but it's not perfect. And it will work even in a world of AI, because Google aren't letting their huge audience disappear anytime soon, and they are embedding Gemini within their Google search listings, which is only going to reduce people disappearing off.
Now, one question before we say thank you, and because our time's almost up. Any advice to these folks that are going to be starting out their careers as marketers? Any thoughts on getting off on the right foot, James?
It's a bit like the recommendation around understanding the market. So you are all very privileged that you are coming into the market when all this kind of generative AI capability is emerging. The reason for that is you can use it in very clever ways. If you are joining a public organization, they will have investor reports, they will have various other reports that will give you an insight into that business. There is nothing more powerful in an interview than a candidate who has done their due diligence and understands in great detail the business and the market that they are interviewing for. Absolutely, that is what marketers are all about. So wherever you are, whatever you look to do, having an understanding and using generative AI to, ingest 10 years of publicly available investor reports into a summary that you can then kind of play back to an interviewer is an incredible gift. And not everyone will be doing it. Not everyone will be doing it. So yeah, use the tools at your capability to truly understand the market, and that will place you ahead.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, James, for your time. This was fantastic. That share of search, we will become experts, and we will give you all the credit next week. You might be getting some emails, because I would definitely suggest that you follow James. I will send out the EQ planner information, like I say, next week's module, since I gave you the whole week off to celebrate and enjoy Thanksgiving. You guys can check that stuff out. The module will be opened up on Monday. So as you leave, just say thanks or put it in the chat box. That was awesome, James. Again, thank you for everything. This was awesome. I knew it would be, and you delivered. So again, thanks so much. All right,
Thank you. My pleasure.
Say some thanks on your way out. Take yourself off mute and say thank you. All right, James, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, James.
Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, bye, everybody.